What makes the achievement of emotional sobriety so difficult is the habits we have, the patterns we have in our behavior, the habitual ways that we've come to think about things. We have to really become aware of those things in order to challenge them, because the consciousness that has created a lot of the problems in our life cannot solve it, cannot change things. So what happens is the first step is waking up. Well, I'm going to kick off this meeting tonight by sharing some slides with you that I think are going to be helpful in terms of us exploring self-hate, self-esteem, and the 12 steps. As everybody knows, we've been digging into how this 12 steps help develop an authentic self-esteem, a true self-esteem that's really grounded in humility. How that also impacts our development of emotional sobriety, and how the step impacts the development of that emotional sobriety and self-esteem. But one of the areas that when we start to get into step 8, and when we start looking at making a list of all the people we've harmed and become willing to make amends to them all, that it's very common for us to start to confront our own self-hatred. And I thought it would be a good idea to start to dig into talking about that today and possibly next time. So let me just start by sharing with you. If you guys like how that slide moved, that was pretty cool, wasn't it? Pretty fancy. So step 8 is the development of the best possible relations with every human being we know. That's where we're going. That's our goal here in working the steps, is to develop. We started that in step 6 and 7, to develop the best possible attitude towards our problems, towards our basic flaws or our shortcomings. Well, our what we call our character defaults. I think Glenn is credited with saying that. Step 8 and 9 now is shifting to developing our best possible attitudes towards relations. And then we're going to develop our best possible attitudes towards life itself and towards ourselves. That's what we're learning to do. That, in one way, is a great description of what emotional sobriety is. So step 8 is specifically focusing on our relationships with others. He also says at the end of this step is that we should avoid extreme judgments of ourselves and of others. We must not exaggerate our defects or theirs. A quiet, objective view will be our steadfast aim. So once again, emotional sobriety has to do with being balanced, right? And being able to look at these things and see what's going on without falling out of one side of the bed or other, without giving ourselves too much, leeway, and without giving ourselves too much criticism about it. And this is where we've got to guard against this self-hate. So what is self-hate? Well, it's any distortion of self, either in idealization or degradation, like shaming of self, must be viewed as a rejection of our actual self and is therefore self-hating. Well, we can go on and further define that as any thought, feeling, or action based on any combination of false beliefs, which in any direct or indirect way diminishes, depletes, erases, denigrates, creates an adversarial relation to self, or hurts our true self, is part of the self-hating process. Well, wow, that opens up a lot of possibilities, doesn't it? So self-esteem and self-hate. Well, any behavior, idea, concept, or attitude which erases, diminishes, or harms our self-concept and therefore harms our self-esteem. Remember, self-esteem being the evaluation we have of ourselves, the evaluation we have of our self-concept. So what are some of the characteristics of self-hate that we're going to look at? Well, if you heard, it creates a distortion of self. Either we think too much about ourselves or we think too little, right? We're either egomaniacs with inferiority complexes, right? That's what you guys have heard in the room. Egomaniacs with inferiority complexes. Any rejection of the actual self is therefore self-hating. An exaggerated self-opinion. a relentless criticism of yourself, lives based on a set of shoulds, right? When you're basing your life on a set of shoulds, that's an act against yourself because you're erasing yourself and you're not considering what you want. A rejection or denial of reality, minimizing or ignoring one's abilities. These are all characteristics of self-hate. And while self-hate is experienced in dichotomous ways, like you feel an intense self-hate if you do something that you don't like, the truth is that it's an insidious and ongoing and continuous process that's always running at a very low level in our life. This is Dr. Karen Horney. She says, patients for whom self-hatred is in the foreground present an attitude of self-minimizing, self-accusing, and self-frustrating with a resulting low self-confidence, feelings of having no rights and being unwanted and worthless. Because of their self-hatred, they long for or demand as their right for love, support, company, often as a protection against their own vindictive self-hatred and despair. So if I hate myself and you love me, then maybe I've protected myself against turning against myself, but it doesn't work. It's that emotional dependency that she looks at from this point of view, which I think is a great way to look at it. This is what Brandon says. Low self-esteem causes an excessive preoccupation with gaining the approval and avoiding the disapproval of others, hungering for validation and support at every turn of your existence. If you get the disapproval from others, what do you end up doing? Turning against yourself and hating yourself because you're not lovable. She goes on to say that the aim of therapy is to help a person abandon his drive to actualize the idealized self and move towards self-realization. Well, that's what the 12 steps do. So self-hate develops from an identification with the false self that has been idealized. So we think, if I idealize my false self, if I become this person, I will be okay. And we identify with that. And then if we're anything less than that false self that we think we should be, we become the despised self and we hate ourselves. Self-hate is a result of the inner conflict that emerges between our false self and our real self. We disdain our real self if it's not in line with what the false self says. Now think about that self-rejection. It's terrible. Self-hate calls for rigorous self-protective mechanisms. We either externalize or project what we hate and despise in ourselves, and we put it out there in the world because we don't want to face it in us. So self-respect is based on acceptance of who we are. You've heard Roger talk about that. We've heard Tom talk about it, me talk about it, Herb. And if we have an utter refusal to be in an adversarial or hating relationship towards ourselves, we're going to include hating ourselves as part of self-respect from now on. So Virginia Satir says this: we are always trying to get out of our emotional jail. Mostly we try by begging, threatening, or pleasing other people, trying to get them to do it for us. All right, well, we're not going to go into that. So I wanted to share that with you because I want to have that set the stage for our discussion of self-hate. So let's invite my fellow discussants in. And I just need to step away 1 minute and handle something. I'll be right back. So Tom, I will turn the meeting over to you and you bring Roger in and MC that discussion. I'll be right back.
Will do. All right, Herb, you're in. Tom, you're next. And Roger. Welcome, gents.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate it. Either of you guys eager to jump in?
I have very little to say. I really can't relate at all, even though I hear it and I see it a little bit in other people, but the term self-hate makes no sense to me at all. No, it doesn't. I mean,
no, I hear you, Herb. Say more about that, though, if you would. Yeah.
Say it again.
Say more about that, if you would.
Yeah. My experience with doing the step work was a embarrassment in terms of when I did the 4th step, and especially the 8th step, to see the impact of my behavior on other people. It popped the delusion, of course. I mean, it shattered the delusion of the grandiosity that I had, and it began to open me up to see that that was a cover-up for that low self-esteem. I couldn't have used all these words at that point, but that was the impact of it. But especially the 8th step, where I saw the impact of my behavior on other people. I hear all the time people wanting to put themselves first on the 8th step list because they need to make amends to themselves. And I get it 100%. I understand it, especially in light of the culture that we have today and this kind of the sophistication of psychology. However, my recommendation, because it was the recommendation to me, that I put myself last on the list, because I was always putting myself first. And most people, even the most subtle Al-Anon or codependent, once you have a little conversation with them, will see that their underlying, way down deep motivation is really about self. It's about self-help. It's about self-survival. It's about getting and controlling so that I am safe and I have my needs met. So I suggest that people legitimately have to make amends to themselves. My experience was when I was actually making the amends to other people, by the time I had finished doing that, there was such a nice sense of myself and my restored of my dignity in a way that I personally didn't have to make amends to myself, that the very process of making amends to other people, the willingness to correct and balance the scale, the repair the damage, was in fact restorative to me. But there are lots of other people who have much different experience than I do. And I suggest that they literally formally put themselves on the list and then do what they need to do in order to repair that damage to themselves. And some of it, like they didn't finish high school or they didn't finish college, they go back and they finish high school or they go back and finish college to, in fact, finish the repair of the damage that they've done to themselves. So pretty much, we're not yet talking about the forgiveness process, but this is a major component in what I consider to be the forgiveness process. And when I looked up that term forgiveness in a dictionary, look at my hand, anybody who's not looking at the screen, forgiveness is a decision to release. A decision to release. And the prayers that we pray, when we forgive them, we are forgiven. When we release them, we are released. And that's absolutely my experience with it. Thanks.
Wow, Herb, what? Do you mind if I jump in, Tom? What an eye-opening thing to hear from you. I so appreciate that. This idea of self-hate makes no sense to me at all. I cannot relate. I love it that you put it that way, because my head was not going to go there at all, for myself and my experience. But as soon as you said that, it was like I had an aha moment, I guess, because my family of origin was not perfect by any stretch. And all 4 of us kids, so to speak, me and my 3 siblings, have our share of, problems and issues for sure. But I never remember being given the kind of criticism by either my mom or my dad, the kind of judgmentalism, the kind of negativity toward me that so many people that I've known and worked with as clients were subjected to at horrendous levels, right? All the way through and including physical and sexual abuse, severe neglect, and so on. But when you said that, it went like, for me, it went like, oh my God, I am even feeling more grateful than I normally do, which is a pretty high level of gratitude for me. and it chokes me up a little bit that I was blessed to have the mom and dad that I was blessed to have. Because, and again, all four of us kids managed to develop our own depressions, our own anxiety, our own, struggles and difficulties at reasonably serious levels, for those of you who know me well. And yet, I rarely, at a conscious level at least, I too, as you said it, I don't have an experience of self-hatred that's very often at all. I think I understand it deeply just because I've tried to help a lot of people over the last 45 years, try to not just understand the sources of it within themselves and their families of origin often, but also how to counteract it, right? And the first step, as Alan and we keep saying, is to become aware. So you just spurred all of that in me, Herb. And so I really want to thank you for that. The other thing I want to share is, Alan, God, those slides you showed are mind-blowing to me. The depth and perceptiveness that they show. And what stands out to me tonight is that both what we think of in a normal sense as self-hatred, constant berating of ourselves, constant sending of negative messages about our own worth, our own value as human beings, and so on. Yes, that is one form that self-hatred can and often does take. But for you to bring in the idealization piece as an equally damaging form, because it also negates connection to our real self. Again, not saying I always have to act on or express in any given context or to any given person, even what my real self is sending up to me into my consciousness, right? I still want to be aware of context. I want to be aware of the impact on other people. But it just, that too hit home for me tonight, that I do myself an equally serious disservice in my feelings and in my functioning when I move toward idealization, and I've got to make that kind of perfectionistic idea of myself work, as much as when I move toward a very clear and active kind of, putting myself down or even despising myself. Either one is a hall of mirrors, is the term that I wrote down. I can put the idealized version of myself in the mirror, or I can turn around the corner in the hall of mirrors and I can see the glowering, hate-filled, self-hateful part at those moments in my life where I have, had strong judgments toward myself, where I felt a lot of shame, right? Or a lot of guilt and regret and remorse. But either one of those types of mirrors creates exactly the kind of distortion that you're describing, Al. So thank you, Herb, and thank you, Al, both. That's all I've got tonight.
You, Raj.
Is this thing on? Can anybody hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear
We
me?
can all hear
Because
you.
I want to tell.
Oh, quick mute.
Don't sound so disappointed, Herb. It's oh, we can hear you, buddy. It's like, no, I didn't have, my microphone was off, and I couldn't figure out why people were ignoring me, because because Herb, you really, I jumped in there right where with Roger because I got turned on by what you were saying too, and I thought Roger and I were talking at the same time, and but nobody even seemed to notice that. And so I get a message from so my emotional sobriety work is going on, while this is happening, because I'm going like, well, what the fuck, man? These are my friends. It's like, but I get a message from Declan who says for some reason we can't hear you. So I appreciated that he at least noticed I was mouthing the words, to say something. And then I said, well, thanks. That explains why people are ignoring me. And then Tom Potash writes, well, there are probably several reasons for that, but your microphone being off could be one of them. It's like, which I thought was the best comeback of the evening.
But I gotta say, Tom, I know I was speaking, so I wasn't paying attention to your lips moving, but I was utterly oblivious to your efforts to say anything.
Well,
So
well,
I got to take
that's-
ownership of that.
That, well, I appreciate. Well, you didn't hear me. It's like no, but I loved what and equally to what you said. I love how this stuff just kind of we bounce off of each other to do this. But the the thing I was actually saying at the time when I was talking, I thought I was trying to talk over you, Roger, was that Herb reminded me of a little entry in a book I wrote back in the 1990s, I believe it was, that was called If I Were They. And it was just, I always remember it because it's one of those things, and you probably all know, and probably many of you listening know, it's one of those deals that it was just felt more channeled than one of the little lines. I just felt more channeled. Than it's like, something, it was wiser than I knew, but I always loved it. And it just says, forgiveness is not something we do. It's our natural state when we're not holding on to old pain. And when you did your fist, Herb, that's what I saw, and I remembered that and felt that again. And there's a mishmash of goes on in my head when you started talking about this stuff, Alan, because the thing. And I don't think I'm not going to try to be coherent about this. I'm just going to drop some points here and just see if it will be part of the conversation. This is a more complicated about including ourselves or not include how we include ourselves in this in the 8th step is in my experience is complicated. It's like it's not a simple thing, because I definitely believe, looking back, that I was one of the people, and I've seen other people and talked with people in therapy about this, but I was one of the people that basically, with all of my self-hatred, which I took a while for me to name that, but it's like, part of the result of my self-hatred was a grandiosity that that Alan talks about, the arrogant guy with low self-esteem. It's like, and so I was one of those guys that when you hear about, oh, you need to make amends to yourself also, I jumped on that like, oh yes, that's the most important thing. And it's like, and thinking, oh, I'm this wonderful model for codependence recovery when I do that. But it's like, as time goes on, I look, hindsight's the only clear insight we get, right? It's like we can get other insight is just fucking guessing. But it's like the hindsight, I look at that and go like, no, I became involved in another form of self-absorption in that way. So I love the idea that what Herb talks about, that by acting in a responsible way through the 8th step, my self-esteem is at least in part restored or stored for the first time if it had never been there, and I actually can have a step into integrity by acting right, rather than pounding my chest and saying, aren't I amazing how much I'm loving myself. Like, so it's a mess because it wasn't like I couldn't figure any of that stuff up when I was in the middle of it. So I guess my thing is, if anybody feels confused by it, it's like, you're not the only one.
God, that is so spot on, Tom. Again, on the heels of what you offered, Herb, it's like that process of healing oneself, but through focusing on how I've harmed others, right? By focusing on the harm that I've done to others and the healing value that has when I do that. The other thing I wanted to add on the heels, rather than self-hatred, my experience more, and this has to do with self-idealization, perfectionism, is I feel, much more frequently a sense of disappointment with myself, right? A sense of frustration with myself. So it's in there, but it's not in a super intense form that I experience it with so many people who, as we say, internalized these very, very intense negative beliefs about our own worth and value as human beings. So I did just want to add that piece. Sorry. for jumping
Well-
in. Anything else,
well,
Tom, that you had?
Well,
Yeah.
I wanted to say though that I just want to validate the idea that I feel the same way. I very often have experiences of feeling disappointed in you. So thank you for validating that. That's all I have to say.
I couldn't be happier to do
You
so.
know,
I
you-
could-
hey, you know what we're gonna call it? You just got Rutledged.
Well, let's use a tennis
You
tennis
just
metaphor. He
You gotta do
lost
something, got it like Groucho Marx said, the bird that dropped.
the bird
Yeah.
jumps in. He said the magic word.
Anytime
like-
something gets Rutledge, we have to have that.
Hey, listen,
Not-
it's
but-
Tom Potash will have something for us next time.
right. But I tell you, Alan, the tennis metaphor is that Roger just lobbed that one over the net for me. It's like that was too easy.
There you go. But
I-
you didn't preface it with,
I got a sick 5-year-old downstairs, so I'm gonna check out of the meeting for the rest of it. I'll
Uh-huh.
turn this over to you, Tom, and in the discussion, you guys, I'll see you next week.
Mhm. God bless you, man.
take
Yeah,
take
all the
care, Alan.
best.
Okay.
all the best to the little one there, Alan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was that was great, Tom. What Tom Potash? Yeah. Anything to add?
Yeah, you know what? I appreciate all the feedback so far. And part of it is, it's an individual experience. So depending on how much I felt ground down, right? Both from pre-recovery and then when I arrive, I'm told this is about ego deflation. I'm like, well, how much more deflated can I get, right? But it really is more like ego equalization, I think. And I love the idea that actually through the process, it starts to come into balance because I start to do real quality spiritual work on myself and psychological improvement and going out to the world and helping others and making amends. This is all kind of getting to the equalization, that level of humility that Bill talks about. So while I have all of the messages that would certainly lead me to or led me to self-hatred, this process starts to whittle away at it and I think that idea of humility gets me to a point where the comparison shopping that I did starts to drop away, right? So if I'm feeling good about myself through comparison to others, that doesn't last very long because then I'll find someone better than me to compare and then I'll start to feel happy again.
Compare and despair. The program
I
teaches
love
that.
that.
Yep.
Yeah. And so getting to a point where, I think I described it last week, like all of those messages are still, float around. It's just, what do I harbor? What do I pull down and like, nurture and which messages am I giving time and attention to?
Yeah.
So
Good one.
Yeah, I like that. And Tom Rutledge, with regard to what you just shared, for some of us is compare and despair. But if my way of boosting my self-esteem, pseudo self-esteem, as Brandon calls it, is to look for people that I believe that I favorably compare myself to,
Oh yeah.
then it's not compare and despair. It's compare and self-elevate. Right.
Well, but
ego
but what I
feed.
But what I was saying, I think this was Potash's, one of Potash's point. You tell me, Tom, if I'm missing it, but is the idea I start there, but if I'm using comparison, and I'm better than somebody, then somebody else is going to come in my frame, and they're going to fuck that up because I'm going to see them as better than me. And it's like I'm going to land on compare and despair one way or the other. I'll land back there because no, I have, I got my self-esteem for years and years and years simply from judging other people from afar. You know,
Right.
especially people, mainly people I didn't know, so that I could
Yeah.
judge them, easily. But I mean, I would judge them thoroughly and
Oh, yeah.
and righteously, and it's like, but eventually what Potash reminded me of is eventually that comparison is going to come back at me, and that is not the way to measure. Yeah.
Yeah. I would add, though, just to take it a step further.
Yeah, come on. Yeah.
Well, when I'm in a sufficiently self-focused, self-engaged mode, I might be so closed off and so defended. See, you got to that from my point of view because you kept working on yourself.
You're right.
Right?
You're right.
You kept looking at yourself.
You're right. For years and years, I was closed. Yeah, you're right.
And I have parts of me that could stay closed my whole life. And I've certainly worked with people that struggle with staying closed off. They're not going to let in any way that's meaningful to them, a sense of being inferior to somebody else, a sense of being less than. So I just want to me, it's the whole spectrum,
no, you're right.
See, of all those possibilities that we have. Within each one of us, we have parts of ourselves that can be there. And certainly across us as a population of people, we cover all those places. So
one of the antidotes for me to this, and thank you for the stimulus to remember this, is I did the compare better or less than, but when I got some legitimate, credible information that I understood and accepted about personalities and the organic nature of perception, attitude, and orientation, the genetic or whatever it was, that personalities are different.
Yeah.
They're not, nobody's better, nobody's worse, but they are different. It was like, oh, they're just different. I'm this way, they're that way, and they're fine. I'm fine. We're just different. That was huge for me. It came from a study of personalities out of psychological research, actually. And it was very healing to me in terms of my relationship with myself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it gave you, because we can't just stop thinking a certain way. We have to have a new way to think. It gave you something to take this place that was more credible than what you had before. That's beautiful.
I hear a lot of people criticize the 12 steps, that they're old-fashioned. I can understand that criticism. They were written back in 1935. Some people that are agnostic have difficulty with the word God used in the steps. For me, I look at the process that's involved, the forces that the 12 steps generate are so powerful that I think they're ageless. There's this interesting phenomena that happens when you work the steps. They create a charge and then a discharge. The first step, we're powerless. Our life has become unmanageable. It creates this charge. We're in big trouble and we don't know what to do. And then step 2 comes along and it says we have hope. That charge, that existential crisis that we have is resolved. What's happening here is parallel to life. We charge ourselves when we breathe in. When we exhale, we discharge. That's the rhythm of life. And the way I love to think about the 12 steps, it's helping us get connected to the rhythm of life so we can learn how to show up in a good way.